times. I don't think you come away from something like that physically unscathed, obviously, but also emotionally.
Of everything bad I've done in my life, I think this is probably one of the things I regret the most.
And I was like, what the fuck is this?
I mean, I would like to have like a normal childhood memory, but I don't.
I really feel like the folds of my brain were reorienting themselves.
I want to disturb, I want to make people uncomfortable.
You get blood on the handle of that knife, and it starts turning in your hand, and you make a miscut. Writing's really no different. Sometimes you're barely holding on.
Hi, Phil. I don't know if you remember, I did speak to you a while back when you did Spine of the Night, so it's good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Congratulations on the series.
Thank you. I'm looking at that stack of books. I recognize a lot of those books. I haven't read all of them, but I recognize. Yeah, that's awesome.
I've not read all of them. Yeah, there's a few of them. I've ruffled them around a little bit, just so it kind of. There's a few that are in the documentary as well. But
yeah, definitely.
I mean, I just this morning I read Elizabeth Handbook. What was it called now again? Damn, I forget the name. The one with the mansion.
Oh, wait, the one about the band or
the
rock
one
band
about the band in the yeah, that's right.
Wilding Hall, is that what it's called?
That's right. That's it. Right?
Yeah.
Was it Wyndham Hall or Wilding? Yeah, that's one. Yeah. Yeah, I loved it. Yeah, I mean, it's really short, but it's really cool. I think I loved it a lot more than kind of other super. I'm not a massive fan of paranormal stories typically, so I think that kind of resonated more with me because I'm really into like music and that kind of that music, that area of music was kind of right up my street. So I love that a bit. Yeah. So I mean, that kind of brings me to the first question. Sorry, you were going to say something?
No, I was going to totally distract from your interview. You go ahead.
No, but I was just going to say, but I mean, I hadn't read very much of Elizabeth Hand before, so I'm kind of curious what it was that made you decide which 5 authors you wanted to go with first off. Was this specifically for a specific kind of the kind of genres you wanted to kind of tackle first of all, or were there specific authors you wanted to tackle, or was it just out of personal preference of the type of writers that you resonated with, that you'd like to read?
A little bit of all of the above. I mean, I would describe it as sort of organic. So the project started with Laird because I don't know if you've read Laird Barron's work, but I'm good friends with him. I knew that his life was extreme in various ways. So it was born like rural and rough in Alaska. He raced the Iditarod, the dog sled race a number of times, has almost died on the ice of Alaska a number of times. And then just in terms of the origin story of the series, like he a couple of years ago got very sick and almost died. And I was like, oh, this is awful. And then selfishly, I was like, oh, I need to put Laird on camera and get him to tell people about his life before, in case he goes off and dies on us.
Who needs enemies when you've got friends? No?
Yeah. So I dragged him. I think we were the first time he'd left his house since he was so sick. We dragged him out to be interviewed by us. And that was really out of, I mean, a selfish instinct and a friend instinct to Laird. So we did that and cut it together. And then I was sort of like, my producer was like, well, this is great, but what is it? And then we were like, oh, well, we'll make it a series. So we expanded from there. And the authors were, it almost sort of one led to the other. Like I knew Stephen Graham Jones a little bit. I knew that his life had also been interesting and that he came from a different, socioeconomic and like he's Native American, right? So it's a whole different background than Laird. So having done that, we did Stephen Graham Jones, and then actually Elizabeth Hand was a recommendation from Paul Tremblay because they're good friends, and he was like, "Oh, you should talk to is Liz because she's had a really interesting life and she, is very thoughtful on different topics." And then so that's how Liz got into it, and then Paul, I was just like, Paul and I live close to each other. I was like, I'm gonna interview Paul. I said, you have horror movie there. I'm gonna tell you what Paul said to me when I asked him, because he knew that I'd talked to Stephen and Laird, and I was going to talk to Liz. And I was like, oh, you have to come do one. And he was like, okay, but am I going to be the boring one? Like, are you just asking me because
just like a filler material?
Yeah. And then Mariana Enriquez, I'm not sure if you've read her work, but she's
fantastic. Well, I love it. I mean,
incredible. So we were very lucky. I said I wanted to get her, but she's Argentinian, and then she just happened to be in New York doing press for something, and I was like, oh, okay, let's try to get her when she's in New York, and she graciously agreed. So and then there, as you would imagine, there are so many other writers that I would love to talk to, but we capped it at 5 basically to get it out there and see how the response was going to be, and hopefully we can do more. So
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks. Ashley?
Everyone obviously has their own sort of unique path, to becoming like a horror writer or filmmaker like yourself, or fan. And what I was wondering is, which moments from these interviews surprised you the most in terms of what led these authors to the genre? And I know Howard was exactly the same opinion, as we were particularly struck by Stephen Jones' account of his life, because it sounded pretty traumatic. There's certain events that obviously he couldn't discuss.
Yeah,
But
he said he couldn't. What can I say on camera? Exactly. Yeah, he's like, well, what can I tell you that I can say on camera? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, so I knew most of their lives before I talked to them, sort of. I did a bunch of research, but I couldn't actually find a lot about Mariana Enriquez's life before I talked to her. So her whole interview, I mean, I knew to ask about Argentina. I knew to ask about the dictatorship. I knew, like, there were certain things I knew. So a lot in her interview, which I know you haven't seen, so it's sort of not fair, it was really revelatory in a certain sense. I mean, she tells it, just to tell you, she tells a great story. She's a character. She has a lot of great stories from her youth, but she talks specifically. So her parents were like left-wing Marxist-y types, but living under a right-wing dictatorship. So they didn't want her to go to the public schools in Argentina because they didn't want her to get indoctrinated into the dictatorship. So they sent her instead to the Catholic schools, thinking it would be easier to deprogram Catholicism from her. And she was like, yeah, except that I went there and I was like, this is amazing. Like I love all this pageantry and the blood and the ritual and the whole thing. So that kind of stuff. I mean, there's just a number of great details that I won't ruin here, but she had a lot of surprises in her interview, for sure.
I mean, obviously, what we've got here, we can't not ask you the same question, because obviously your life's kind of pretty dedicated to the horror genre and pretty much everything that you've done to date.
Yeah.
Have you got a similar kind of story of something, not actually kind of what you've seen on the television or movie, something, but something that actually happened to you that you kind of,
I mean, I wish I
said led you into that path?
I wish I did. I mean, I think ultimately, Paul saying he's the boring one. I think the truth is that the boring one was actually behind the camera.
Behind the camera.
Yeah. But no, I mean, like a lot of people, I mean, I grew up like, upper middle class in the middle of the Midwest in the United States. So there's no, the only violence in my past is like the sort of cold emotional violence of nobody ever talking about their emotions, which is like a whole other thing. So no, and I mean, I grew up, I was sort of a fearful child. I was, scared of like Pee-wee's Big Adventure and that kind of stuff when I was a little kid, and then as a teenager just got introduced to probably horror film and horror literature at about the same time, probably reading it first, actually. So probably reading Stephen King and then Clive Barker and Lovecraft and those things, and then I would imagine around, I don't remember, but I would imagine within the next year or so, really getting into like Alien and Evil Dead 2 and sort of, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, whatever, like getting into it from there. But there's no, like, I don't have a moment where like somebody jumped into a caliche pit and fooled me into thinking that they were dead or anything. No. Yeah.
Actually, now that you're mentioning, I mean, I've just kind of noticed that the image is moving behind you. Can you tell us a little bit behind this image that I've just spotted on Instagram just a few hours ago?
I've got my thing reversed. So this is our official mascot for the show. I've proclaimed it to be our official mascot for the show. I call it Paperface. It was designed by Trevor Henderson, who is a horror artist. He's very big on Instagram. I don't know if you guys know of like Siren Head. You know what Siren Head is? It's okay if you don't. No. So Siren Head is like a couple of years ago was a viral image that the kids loved, and it's and Trevor made it, and it's like the original image is like a sort of spooky photograph of a countryside, and there are a bunch of electricity poles, and one of them has sirens on it, like an air raid siren. But if you look closer, you can see that it's actually a creature. It's not actually, it's like he's hidden this strange creature. Right. So Trevor does a lot of monster design artwork and just loves the horror genre. So we approached him to design our. Well, it was originally a poster, but I liked it so much I decided to proclaim it to be our mascot. If you
moving around like that is just really quite disquieting. Yeah.
If you look closer at it, you won't be able to tell in this, but if you pull it up online, the pages on his head are all from stories that are written by our authors. So,
All right.
yeah.
Great. Ashley.
It's a lovely thing with this series of this juxtaposition between the authors talking about their lives and their influences, and then it's interspersed with them reading their own short story. Was that something that you and your team selected for them, or did you leave it to the authors to give them the latitude to pick something that they were particularly fond of?
So we chose the stories almost entirely. The one exception, and we chose them. We were looking. Well, there's a number of criteria, to be honest. The most boring criteria is length, because we didn't want anything too long, and we wanted something that we knew we could edit. The second criteria within that was a story that we thought we could find an interesting interplay between interview and story. So, and then. So we chose all of them except for Stephen Graham Jones's story. So I'm going to tell you another story about making the show. When I knew we were going to do Stephen Graham Jones, I asked Paul Tremblay, "Oh, what story of Stephen should we read?" And he said to me, "Oh, Stephen loves this story he wrote called Father, Son, and Holy Rabbit. I know he's very proud of it. You should read that one. He'll be excited." So I said to Stephen, "Oh, we're going to do Father, Son, Holy Rabbit." And he's like, yeah. Okay. So we get to his house to read, to set up. And he's like, and I'm like, and then you'll read the story. He's like, "Yeah, everybody loves that story, but I don't know. I don't really like it." And I was like, God damn it. So then he said, "Oh, I have this thing called Dear Final Girls that I read at conventions, and it absolutely kills at conventions. So maybe I'll read both." So if you look at the Stephen Graham Jones episode, there's still a little bit of Father, Son, Holy Rabbit in there. There's a moment when it you sort of get a little bit of it, but most of it is Dear Final Girl. So that's the only one that the author really picked themselves. The rest of them we chose sort of based on those criteria.
So I mean, we're running out of time. So just to kind of finish off, something that I really enjoyed about the film. I mean, it started off the Stephen Graham Jones episodes that I saw was, I think that's the first. Those are the first few episodes that are coming out now. And he really touches on how writing the stories kind of brings him back to realizing just how human the horror is and how human we are. And he thinks that the readers kind of will get that from his books as well. Was that a kind of a central theme that you wanted to serve as kind of a backbone for the series, or is that just something that came organically as well?
I mean, it's almost 100% the backbone of the series. I mean, I didn't know he was going to say that, but it is the the thesis of the show, or the thematic question of the show, basically is like about creativity, but specifically human creativity. And like you're supposed to feel as if you're getting to know these human beings, and like think about the process of creation, and what of our biography goes into our creative work and what doesn't, and these sorts of questions is really sort of the overarching question of the series from my perspective. And that feeling of like sitting with a person. And I mean, it's if you look at the way we shot it too, and this is intentional, we shot it with do you know what the Interatron is? Have you ever heard of this term? If not, it's okay. So it's a documentary filmmaking term. Errol Morris, who made a bunch of famous documentaries, invented it. And it's basically a thing so that when the interviews are going on, the authors can't. I'm not next to the camera. I'm somewhere else entirely. And the Interatron is putting my face on the lens of the camera. So when they're answering, they're looking like, it's like if I'm looking, that's my camera.
Right, because some of the looks to the camera were very kind of serious. I wasn't sure if that was actually your direction, or there was something going on there.
They're looking at me because I'm in the lens. So one does that in an interview to try to encourage the connection between viewer and subject, and try to get to the humanness of it and the humanness of the creation. So yeah, thank you for noticing. for sure. That was
really great. It works really well, especially the first episodes with Stephen Graham Jones. The way he looks at the camera. It almost felt as if he'd been directed to kind of to look almost like with his evil eyes straight into the camera.
It's because I'm snapping and saying, "Here, I'm here."
Over here, come on, cheese.
It's a really intense few episodes with Stephen. I must admit, I was a little bit kind of afterwards. I'm sure he's not that scary in real life.
He's an amazing. If you ever get a chance to be at a horror convention where he's reading or doing anything, you should go see him. He's intensely charismatic. He's a real. Somebody described him as having a real rock star aura about him, and that is absolutely true. He's great.
Oh, I mean, the horror it just runs through his bloodstream. It's just it's just amazing.
Yeah, for sure.
Amazing guy. Yeah. Well, listen, congratulations on the show. I can't wait to see the episodes that we haven't seen yet, and I can't wait for it to. Next Friday night, it screens the first episodes.
Yep.
Best of luck with that, and I hope to speak to you again sometime soon.
Yes, thank you guys so much. This was awesome.
To see you again.
Enjoy that reading pile.
I will do. Yeah. All right. All the best. Take care.
Don't worry. This is a baptism we all understand in blood. That cathartic self-realization when you finally take up that machete or that axe or that chainsaw, and that way you don't smile in that slowed down instant when your hand closes on the grip of that machete, on the handle of that axe, the way your lips are set in a grim line when you pull the ripcord on that chainsaw. It's one of the more perfect moments there is, yes. But at what cost, right?